What is up, guys? Welcome back to another book review. Today is January 18th, and today we're going to be talking about Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics. I just finished this book yesterday. It's one of those books that whenever you get through, you just feel really proud of yourself because it's a pretty thick book. Yes, as some of you guys may know, I've been studying economics recently, self-studying. I've been reading a lot of different schools, the Austrian school, some more free market economists. I've been diving into some Keynesian economists as well. And I wanted to pick up this book because I had been listening to a couple of Hoover Institute interviews with Dr. Sowell, who I believe is a professor at Stanford University. And he's just really brilliant. And a lot of his insights run counter to some of just some of the traditional thinking out there. He's one of those guys who's, he's not afraid to speak his mind. You got to respect that. And even if his ideas offend people, he's still willing to stick by his guns. So I decided to pick up what I think is probably his magnum opus. It's 600 pages or so. In my opinion, this book would make a great textbook for economics at the undergraduate level. If my microeconomics class, or even if there was an intro to economics class that had started with this book, I might have actually majored in economics rather than philosophy. But it's interesting because you learn that some of the earliest economists, Adam Smith, I forgot the other gentleman's name, but they were actually philosophers. So I don't think that it's a surprise that I felt really much attracted to Thomas Sowell's writing because I think his writing is very much in that tradition rather than in, I guess, what some would call the marginalist tradition, which is, I think, what's been broadly adopted alongside Keynesian economics at the university level. And this economics textbook is really interesting because there are no graphs, right? There's no graphs, no math. It's deductive explanation of how things are. And Thomas Sowell says that economics is the study of consequences and decisions that are made about land, labor, capital, and resources that go into producing the output of a nation. And I think what's important here to point out is that these resources are not only scarce, but there are alternative uses for these resources. And Thomas Sowell, he hits this point home really hard in the book. He says this time and time again. Economics is scarcity, the use of scarce resources with alternative uses. And I think one of the most interesting quotes from this book that he says, life does not ask you what you want. It presents you with options. Economics is one way of trying to make the most of those options. So when you have resources that are scarce and there are alternative uses for these resources, one thing that is inherent in this setup is that there's going to be competition to use these resources. And not only is there going to be competition, there's going to be inequality. If you're using, a resource for X, that means you can't use that same resource for Y. And the book is broken down into 7 parts. It starts off with prices and markets, industry and competition, work and pay, time and risk, the natural economy. Sorry, I kind of forgot. Hold on. The national economy, the international economy, and special economic issues. And it's 27 chapters long. So this video is already getting quite lengthy. I just want to talk about some of the main takeaways that I had from this book. There are a lot. My book, I was writing in the notes, full of writing, full of highlighting and blocking away things that I thought were interesting. But there were 3 things in particular that really resonated with me on an individual level, so I'm just going to talk about them here. The first one was in the section about productivity and pay, and in particular, what Sowell talks about in that section on productivity and pay is he talks about, I guess, what some would call the wealth gap, right? And he talks about this idea that the wealthy are getting wealthier. And one thing that Sowell points out, and this is something that I've heard, throughout my life and at different points in my, education, I have had different feelings towards this this idea. But one thing that Thomas Sowell points out is that when people say the rich are getting richer, what they're talking about is they're looking at the brackets, so the different income brackets, and they're saying that the lower income bracket is only doing X percent. Let's say, I'm just making these numbers. He actually gets the numbers in the book. I just don't remember them off the top of my head. But he says, like, let's say the bottom bracket is doing 5% better, when the top bracket is doing 100% better. But what he says is that these statistics, they don't actually look at individuals who are moving through those brackets, which studies that look at individuals have some very interesting results. The first point that just kind of illustrates this is that 4/5 of millionaires and Americans are self-made. And so that's according to Sowell. And so this idea that the rich are getting richer doesn't actually fully explain the totality of how the economic machine is working, how individuals are moving through that machine. Because if you look on the individual level, you'll find that not only is there a lot of mobility, but it's actually the case that most people who are in the top income earning class, they did not start there. And it's often the case that if you inherit that status, that you're very likely to lose it over time. And so I thought that was really interesting. And the second thing that I learned in this book is about the idea of economic speculation, which speculation, Sowell says, is a particular type of transaction that occurs in an economy. It's a type of transaction in which a good is exchanged for something, and that good either has not reached its full value on the market, or it has no value at the time. And so you are in a sense speculating that this thing is either going to increase in price, or that another person will buy this thing from you at a higher price at a future time. And he talks about, in particular, you could have considered Amazon in the 1990s to be a form of speculation, the Amazon stock. He discusses this along with oil exploration. He says is another form of speculation. And this makes sense. And he says that speculation is an economic activity that's vital for an economy because it reduces risk and it allows risk to be distributed to people who are better informed and more in a position to take on that risk. So I started thinking about this a lot, in particular as it relates to Bitcoin. And some of you who've been watching my videos may know I am very interested in Bitcoin. And if you think about how Bitcoin works, right, you have miners who are securing the network. And as payment for securing this network, they are given Bitcoin, at which they can do what they wish. And many miners, I'm sure, hold some of that Bitcoin, but obviously there's a good percentage of them who sell it to the market, or else there would be no Bitcoin available for people to buy. And so I guess in a sense, I realized that Bitcoin is economic speculation, and this and there are people who are better suited actually to take on that risk, whether it's because they have information, they have a lower time preference, as Seyfedin Emus would say, or it could be a lot of different things. And he gets into particular as it relates to speculation, he talks about commodity speculators, and I believe Bitcoin is a commodity, but he talks about wheat speculators. So for instance, a farmer, let's say he's farming wheat. What he can do is he can sell that wheat to a speculator before that wheat's actually been grown or produced, and he doesn't know what the value of the wheat will be at time X in the future. So he sells it at time Y in the present because he can sort of reduce his risk. Because let's say a bundle of wheat, I'm just throwing out these prices, costs 15 cents at time Y, and at time X it's unknown, but the person who's speculating, he believes he knows, and he believes that he has asymmetric information. And I think that kind of is the hodler mentality. People who hodl Bitcoin feel like they have asymmetric knowledge as it relates to Bitcoin compared to the general public. They might be in a position to better take on risk, whether it be because they're wealthy or because they're young or because they are just a little bit of risk takers. But it's important, Sowell says, that we understand that speculation is not the same as gambling. Gambling is taking on risk that you create, right? Like you create that risk yourself, and so I think it's an important distinction. Although it is interesting that a lot of Bitcoiners are the poker playing type, and I think there might just be kind of like a risk appetite for those sorts of people. But this video is getting really long, so I just want to jump into the third thing that was really interesting as it relates again to my own personal interest. Sowell talks about brands and the function of brands in an economy. And he goes and he explains the history of brands. And, at one point there wasn't such a thing as a brand. And he explains how brands came to be and how brands basically create expectations and they create accountability. And he talks about how when Heinz was first developing their products, Heinz, the people who make ketchup, that's basically the only thing I know them for, but I believe he says they were making relish at first, and there were a whole bunch of sort of general relish brands, and people didn't know what was inside the relish, and so Heinz, sort of created this brand that represented, them as an entity, as a corporation, and it created accountability. And one thing that they did in particular to differentiate themselves is they made their bottles of relish clear so people could see through and see the contents and see what they were buying. And yeah, I started to realize how incredibly important brands are. I think, as Sowell points out, a lot of people think brands just exist in order to create markups, and I'm sure some of them do. He said like price gouge consumers. He points out that there are a lot of very real and sincere economic benefits in having brands. And so as it relates to myself, I just started thinking, what the accountability of creating a brand, right? And knowing that there's a long-term vision in that you're trying to build a relationship with that consumer, and that relationship is very vital. And if you ruin the reputation of your brand, people are going to stop buying from you, and they're going to know exactly who you are. And in the era of social media, it's vital that you protect your reputation. So yes, all in all, I've kind of stopped giving these rankings to books. When I first started these videos, I used to do like a 1 to 5, but I found that I'm way too liberal with my rankings. Maybe I think I'm just kind of afraid to like offend somebody. Like I would hate for Dr. Sowell to see this. But if Dr. Sowell were to see this, I would give this a 5. Legitimately, it's a 5 in my book. It's definitely going to go down as like one of those books I recommend to my kids, just because it's so clear in his analysis, and it has so many insights. And so anyone who has not explored economics and is looking to get a very breathful overview, this is a great place to start. Yeah, he's, I believe, a free market kind of economist, and it kind of shows in some of his thinking, but I think he does a great job of deductively explaining his conclusions and sort of pointing out cause and effect relationships of incentives that policies create and that are created in markets. And so thank you guys for watching this video. This is a long book review, but it's a big book. Yeah, see you in the next video. Peace.